A lone Mustang horse stood in the frozen twilight, its flanks steaming with each ragged breath, while a circle of ravenous wolves closed in around a lost child. Before we get into this story, let us know where you're watching from, and subscribe for more tales like this one. We upload every day at the same time. The air was cold enough to sting exposed skin, and the biting wind carried an eerie chorus of howls that echoed through the barren trees. Snow draped the rolling hills like a merciless white shroud, broken only by the scattered silhouettes of the pines and the towering forms of the distant mountains. Out in the middle of that wilderness, a small figure stumbled aimlessly through the snow, shivering so violently that each labored step felt like it might be the last. The child, no older than 7, wore a jacket that was far too thin for these conditions, with hands tucked under the arms for any scrap of warmth. Hot tears froze against flushed cheeks, and each tear seemed to crystallize a moment of deeper fear. With the sun having set, and darkness spreading its grip over the landscape, it was a perilous place for anyone, let alone a lost kid whose parents were nowhere to be seen. A piercing gust of wind rattled the nearby tree branches, shaking loose a flurry of snow. The child glanced around, desperate for any sign of hope, any light that might indicate a house or a road. But no such hope appeared. Each second of searching felt increasingly futile, as though the wilderness itself had decided to swallow all traces of civilization. The child's breath clouded in the air, intermingling with the distant howls of wolves. Those howls came closer with each passing moment, and the terror they carried was almost paralyzing. The ground beneath the child's feet crunched with a brittle echo, revealing a thin layer of ice that had formed over patches of bare earth. With every uncertain step, there was the haunting possibility of losing balance and tumbling down. It happened all too soon. The child slipped, landed hard on an elbow, and struggled to rise again as a jolt of pain coursed through that fragile arm. It was only a minor injury compared to the greater danger that loomed, but in that stark, unrelenting land, even the smallest injury could prove devastating. The child pressed a mittenless hand against the throbbing elbow, tears flowing anew, mingling with the dread of hearing something move in the dark. A low growl emerged from the silence, a bestial rumble that resonated in the pit of the child's stomach. That was when the first pair of yellow eyes materialized through the gloom, then another, then more. One by one, wolves began to emerge from between the snow-laden pines, their bodies lean and bristling with muscle. Their dark coats blended with the shadows so well that it seemed like living silhouettes were advancing. The child's heart thundered. Although the wolves did not immediately charge, their tense posture revealed their readiness. Their presence was a menacing, unspoken warning that there was nowhere to run. Stranded and alone, the child watched as the pack started circling, systematically cutting off any chance of escape. In that unbearable moment, the child tried to call out for help, but all that emerged was a strangled whimper. As if on cue, the lead wolf, a hulking beast with a scar across its muzzle, lowered its head and bared its teeth. The rest followed suit, forming a semicircle that crawled closer like a tightening noose. The child stumbled backward, trying to maintain a few precious feet of distance. Then, unexpectedly, a thunderous sound cracked across the quiet gloom. It wasn't a gunshot, nor the snap of a branch, it was the resonant pounding of hooves. Before any of the wolves could pounce, something large and powerful burst onto the scene, scattering snow in a whirlwind of motion. The child squeezed shut their eyes, convinced that this was the end. Some monstrous creature had come to finish what the wolves had started. But a sudden hush replaced the growling. Slowly, cautiously, the child opened those tear-filled eyes. In front stood a Mustang, a wild horse with a coat the color of dark chestnut, glistening with sweat despite the frigid air. Steam flared from its nostrils in ragged bursts, and it surveyed the predators with an almost human-like intensity. For a heartbeat, everything seemed suspended in that stark winter landscape: the wolves, the child, and the majestic horse. The lead wolf didn't stand down. It snarled, stepping forward in challenge. The Mustang, in response, pawed at the ground, its muscles bunched in readiness. Each exhalation sent plumes of steam into the air, as if the horse were breathing fire. Here was a standoff so surreal that one might have believed it was the work of some ancient spirit of the wilderness. Yet the tension was all too real. On one side, a pack of wolves, driven by hunger; on the other, a horse that seemed to recognize it had to protect this small human. Without warning, the horse let out an ear-splitting neigh and charged at the nearest wolves, hooves crashing against the snow. 2 wolves leapt aside, momentarily scattering, but they regrouped swiftly, circling around. The Mustang planted itself between the wolves and the trembling child. Every muscle in the horse's body spoke of defiance, of a raw, unyielding will to survive, and to defend. The child, though still frightened beyond reason, felt a strange surge of hope at the sight of this unlikely guardian. The wolves knew better than to rush headlong into those powerful hoofs, but hunger made them bold. One wolf fainted to the left, drawing the horse's attention, while another lunged from the right with snapping jaws. Yet the Mustang spun around, kicking out with incredible force. The impact landed on the wolf's shoulder, eliciting a yelp as the animal tumbled away through the snow. The rest of the pack, however, did not retreat. They paced and lunged, searching for a weak angle. The horse's ears lay flat against its head, a telltale sign of its absolute focus and aggression. Its eyes flashed with the kind of primal fury that only an untamed creature can possess. The night sky overhead was a swirl of stars, but none of their distant light offered comfort. Instead, the starlight seemed to watch silently as nature played out one of its most ruthless scenes, predator and prey locked in a battle for dominance. The child remained on the ground, barely able to move, fascinated and terrified at once. Icy wind whipped the child's hair, stinging the eyes until tears fell once more, this time more from the cold and the raw emotion rather than sheer terror. Then came a moment when the Mustang reared back, flailing its front hooves at a wolf that tried to flank from behind. During that brief opening, the scar-muzzled alpha charged in from the front. The child gasped as the wolf launched itself toward the horse's exposed chest, jaws gaping, aiming to latch on. The Mustang twisted at the last second. The wolf's teeth clamped down on the air instead of flesh, but the near miss fueled the pack's determination. They must have sensed that if they could force the horse to make one mistake, the advantage would be theirs. The horse, for its part, was relentless. It kicked, twisted, charged, and at times seemed almost to dance on the snowy surface, its hooves moving with surprising agility. The child could only watch in awe at the Mustang's raw power. Each time the wolves lunged, the horse parried or retaliated with swift strikes that could break bones if they connected fully. The wolves attacked in pairs or trios, each attempt thwarted by the horse's speed or its devastating kicks. But the skirmish was only beginning. The pack had numbers, and they were patient. Their panting breath and low growls formed a chilling soundtrack to this standoff in the cold night. The child's body went numb to everything but the immediate moment. The cold, though still ever present, receded into the background as adrenaline and shock took precedence. The child wondered about the horse. Was it some stray ranch horse that had wandered too far from home? Or was it truly wild, driven by instincts deeper and older than anything humans could fathom? The child noticed the Mustang's scars in the flickering starlight, old marks on its flank, a healed-over line across its muzzle. It was no stranger to conflict, nor to survival in this unforgiving terrain. The wolves regrouped around their leader, as if awaiting a signal. Their ears were pricked, muzzles caked with frost, saliva dripping from their bared fangs. Then, with a single snap of the alpha's jaw, they attacked again. The Mustang met them head-on, its powerful forelegs striking out. Snow flew up in a white spray that danced in the air. One wolf managed to bite the horse's hind leg, causing the Mustang to lash out with a frantic kick. The wolf yelped and crumpled to the ground, but the Mustang had taken a deep wound. Crimson droplets appeared on the pristine snow, a stark reminder of how precarious this battle was. The child, feeling a surge of desperate protectiveness, tried to move closer to the Mustang, almost as if wanting to help. But the moment the child shifted, another wolf snapped at the movement, forcing the child to freeze again. This fragile alliance between child and Mustang, set against the encroaching wolves, was as tenuous as the ice beneath the snow. At any second, it felt as though the balance could tip against them. Somewhere in the distance, an owl hooted, the lonely sound carrying far in the frigid air. The Mustang's ears flicked for a second, as though acknowledging the presence of another creature in the darkness, but its focus remained on the wolves. Each wolf's low growl, each step forward, each spray of breath was locked in the Mustang's unwavering gaze. The horse was battered, wounded, but it stood its ground. The Alpha took slow, deliberate strides toward the child's right side, testing if the horse could be drawn away. The Mustang pivoted, refusing to leave the child unprotected. Another wolf seized the moment to charge from behind, but the horse lashed out in a flurry of kicks. The attacking wolf tumbled through the snow, howling in pain. Yet the horse's defense had opened its flank for a brief moment, and the Alpha lunged in, teeth bared, snapping at the horse's barrel. A strangled cry escaped the child's lips as the Mustang swung around to avoid the lethal bite. It was an endless dance of near misses and fierce blows. Time lost meaning in that swirl of danger and desperation. Minutes could have been hours, or maybe it was only seconds. The child felt the edges of consciousness beginning to blur from exhaustion and cold. Each breath took monumental effort, and a dull ache coursed through every limb. The child wondered if rescue was even possible, if there were people out there scouring the night for a lost little one. Or maybe they had given up, waiting for morning light to resume the search. Through heavy-lidded eyes, the child watched the Mustang fight, and a fragment of hope flickered within. The horse was unstoppable, an embodiment of defiance against the odds. Even wounded, it kicked and bit, its mane whipping in the wind. Every now and then, a wolf would dart in, only to be met with a flurry of hooves or a lunge of the horse's teeth. It was a raw display of survival instincts at their peak. Another gust of wind ripped across the clearing, so cold that it felt like shards of glass against the skin. The child shuddered violently, hugging their arms tight. As fatigue weighed heavy, the child glanced at the Mustang with teary admiration. Why was this wild creature risking so much to protect a human child? Perhaps, in the horse's untamed spirit, there was no logic or plan. Perhaps something about the vulnerability of the small figure in the snow stirred a primal spark of empathy, bridging the gap between species. The wolves, though still determined, began to pace with a certain weariness. A few limped from the horse's punishing kicks, while the Alpha's growling breaths came in pained rasps, its chest heaving. Yet despite the mounting injuries, hunger still glinted in their eyes. They had traveled many miles in the dead of winter with scant prey to be found. This confrontation was dangerous, but the potential reward of food drove them to press on. The horse had blood streaming down its flank, and the child was an easy target if only they could force the horse aside. A slight lull settled over the standoff. The child realized that the Mustang, too, was panting heavily. Clouds of vapor jetted from its nostrils, and its sides heaved with exertion. This battle was slowly wearing all parties down. The child's teeth chattered uncontrollably, and large chunks of time seemed to slip away in delirium. Each time the wolf shifted, the horse readied for another assault, and each time the horse defended, the wolves recoiled and sought another angle. Somewhere deep within, the child mustered what little resolve was left. Survival demanded finding a way out of this predicament, but there was no telling how. There was no weapon to fend off the wolves. The child's only ally was the majestic Mustang, standing tall despite injury and exhaustion. The child's heart pounded with something akin to gratitude, mingled with a raw, gripping terror. Would dawn find them all here, locked in a final struggle? The child blinked, fighting off the creeping dark at the edges of vision. The cold was winning, sapping all energy, making movement nearly impossible. The Mustang's fight, however, illuminated an unwavering truth: where there is will, there is a chance. Even in the face of a ravenous pack, this solitary horse refused to abandon the child to fate. And in that realization, the child clutched a final shred of hope, that this incredible display of courage might buy enough time for a miracle, for help to arrive, or for one last stand to ensure that, somehow, they would both make it through the night. Snow continued to drift through the air, landing softly on the wounded Mustang and the child whose limbs were growing perilously stiff. Although the wolves hadn't launched a full offensive in the last few minutes, their presence was an undeniable threat. They circled from the periphery, pressing in closer if the horse showed the slightest sign of letting its guard down. Every so often, one of the more daring wolves would dart forward, teeth bared, hoping to find a weak point. The Mustang would whirl around with astonishing speed, hooves striking out in warning. The pack persisted, tightening their formation, refusing to abandon a meal that might save them from starvation in these lean winter months. The child's teeth clacked uncontrollably, and an overpowering exhaustion threatened to drag the young mind into unconsciousness. Thoughts wandered. How had everything gone so wrong? The child recalled the warmth of home, the flicker of a fireplace, the comforting voice of a mother promising that help was on the way. Then came the memory of trudging through deep snow after somehow getting separated from the search party, convinced that taking one path instead of another might lead to safety. It led, instead, to this silent battleground of frost and predators. The sting of regret was overshadowed by the more pressing sting of the cold, but deep in the child's chest, a pang of desperation flared. If only someone would come. If only there were footsteps in the distance, or a light cutting through the trees, or even a distant call carrying a hint of rescue. No such call emerged, and the darkness seemed to swallow every sound except for the hiss of the wind and the panting of wolves. With each passing minute, the child's situation grew more dangerous. Body temperature was plummeting. If the wolves didn't get the child, hypothermia likely would. Yet the Mustang kept the wolves at bay, its stance unwavering, like a guardian appointed by fate to shield the small figure in the snow. The child's gaze drifted to the horse's flanks, where rivulets of blood stained the coat. Each drop that fell to the snow was vivid and terrible. The horse breathed in shuddering gasps, each exhalation a white plume under the moonlit sky. Suddenly, the lead wolf snarled and advanced, prompting its subordinates to do the same. The circle tightened once more, an unspoken command urging the entire pack to close in. The Mustang lunged at the nearest attacker, but 3 more wolves snapped at its hindquarters. There was no respite, no chance for the horse to rest or the child to crawl away. The harsh crunch of snow under claw and hoof reverberated like drumbeats of a grim symphony. In the midst of it, a wave of nausea swept over the child, a side effect of the cold, the stress, and the gnawing hunger that had gone unaddressed for hours. The child closed heavy eyelids, then forced them open again, determined not to give in to oblivion. Just when it seemed the wolves were about to overwhelm the Mustang's defenses, the horse let out a ferocious whinny and unleashed a new barrage of kicks. 2 wolves scattered, yelping, and the others stepped back to regroup. The child slumped in the snow, chest heaving, lungs burning from the frigid air. The Mustang, sides lathered in sweat turned cold by the wind, swung its head around to check on the tiny figure who remained as still as any other snowy lump in this bleak field. For a moment, horse and child made eye contact in a silent exchange, as though each was willing the other to hold on just a little longer. The child managed a faint nod, though the action was more a shiver than a deliberate gesture. Every muscle ached, and the child realized that standing would be nearly impossible now. The body simply would not respond to commands. Numbness crept into fingers and toes, inching inward from the extremities. Despite this, some spark of resolve remained. The child clung to the sense of awe that this Mustang had appeared at all, protecting an unfamiliar human against a pack of wolves. If such an impossible event could occur, perhaps there was room to hope for yet another improbable outcome: rescue. But rescue still felt out of reach. The wind howled, bending the tops of the pine trees, sending flurries swirling in unpredictable gusts. The world seemed to dwindle to a small, frantic sphere composed of 4 elements: the Mustang, the wolves, the snow, and the child. Each time the child tried to shift position, pins and needles raced up cramped legs. The numbness was not just physical, it seeped into the mind, dulling the senses. A part of the child's psyche wanted to simply surrender, to let the cold take over and slip into a dreamless sleep. Yet every time that temptation beckoned, the sounds of the ongoing struggle provided a jarring reminder: there was a predator out there waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The wolves showed no sign of abandoning their siege. Hunger and the primal urge to survive drove them. They could sense the horse's injuries, the child's weakness, and the growing advantage that time granted them. The alpha licked its chops, pacing in an arc that forced the Mustang to reposition. 2 wolves crept closer to the child from the opposite side, but the horse stomped its hooves and flared its nostrils, warning them off. A frigid wind rippled through the horse's mane, carrying the scent of blood that only stoked the wolf's appetite. The stalemate dragged on, but the scales were tipping. The child's best defense and only ally was also wounded and tiring fast. At that crucial moment, the clouds parted for just an instant, letting the moon illuminate the scene with stark clarity. The Mustang's dark coat glistened, and every breath showed the ragged labor of its lungs. The wolf's eyes glowed eerily in the lunar light, each a reflection of predatory instinct. For a few seconds, it was as though nature itself was shining a spotlight on the savage tableau, highlighting just how thin the line between life and death could be in an environment like this. A shadow flickered near the edge of the trees. The child, delirious with cold and fatigue, initially thought it was another wolf. But then a sharp crack reverberated, like the snapping of a branch. Every wolf's head pivoted in the direction of the sound, ears perked, uncertain whether to interpret the noise as threat or opportunity. The Mustang also seemed to notice, lifting its head high with wide, alert eyes. Hope and fear coalesced in the child's chest. Was that a person? A search party? Or just a lonely deer that had stepped on a loose limb? Whatever it was, it distracted the wolves for a moment, giving the Mustang the slightest opportunity to edge around and position itself more advantageously. The Alpha noticed the movement and whirled back, baring its teeth in warning. Yet the sense of something else in the vicinity lingered, an invisible tension that neither side could ignore. The child held on to a faint spark of optimism. Maybe help was finally near. Maybe that was enough to disrupt the pack's assault. But the moment passed, and no rescuers appeared. The wolves, though wary, refocused on their immediate quarry. The Mustang snorted, pawing the ground with a show of defiance. Then a new wave of attacks began, more chaotic and desperate than before. The Alpha fainted, while two subordinates lunged at the horse's vulnerable sides. The Mustang twisted, rearing back, hooves slicing the air in furious arcs. One wolf lunged in too eagerly and took a glancing blow that sent it tumbling. Yet even as that wolf yelped and tried to scramble away, the Alpha tried to seize the opening to go after the child. The horse, as if guided by an almost supernatural sense, dropped its forelegs and swiveled, nearly trampling the Alpha, forcing the creature to abandon its plan. The child watched in a daze, adrenaline coursing but overshadowed by the creeping chill in the bloodstream. Each flurry of movement became harder to follow, as if the child's vision were filmed over by ice. Inside that near-frozen mind, flashes of memory flickered, moments of warmth from an earlier life, a mother's embrace, a father's laugh, a cozy fireplace at home. How the child longed for those simple comforts, for the chance to close eyes under a warm blanket, safe from the terrors of a winter's night. That life felt impossibly distant now. Fury seemed to ripple through the Mustang's entire body as it guarded the child with unwavering resolve. The horse no longer just reacted, it charged whenever the wolves pressed too close, forcing them back with raw aggression. Yet each charge drained the Mustang's energy reserves further, and the wolves seemed to sense that. With grim resolve, they kept pressing, as unstoppable as the winter itself. An icy gust swept across the clearing, rustling branches high above. The child coughed, feeling a burn in the throat that provided a momentary jolt against the numbing cold. A new swirl of snow danced through the air, momentarily obscuring the wolves' silhouettes. The Mustang used that chance to shift its stance, breathing hard, ears flicking at every small sound. The child tried to call out, to scream for help, but only a croak emerged, lost beneath the wind. The Alpha wolf growled, snapping at a smaller subordinate that had sidled too close to the child without permission. Then the Alpha lifted its muzzle, letting loose a long, haunting howl that echoed over the treetops. The rest of the pack raised their heads and joined in, their voices merging into a chilling harmony. It was a battle cry, a statement that they would not be denied. The Mustang laid its ears flat, showing the whites of its eyes, and scraped the ground as though preparing to charge straight into the heart of that howling mass. Yet even as the Mustang ready to protect the child felt the bite of hopelessness. Were these final moments? The child's vision blurred again, body trembling with violent shudders. Survival might require a miracle beyond even the horse's bravery. The child's heart hammered, each beat a ragged testament to the will to live. Thoughts drifted to the possibility of rescue, clinging to the faint memory of hearing voices hours ago. But the woods were vast, the night unyielding. Each second that passed without human intervention was a second more in which the child and the horse teetered on the brink of death. All at once, the wolves surged forward in a synchronized maneuver. The Mustang spun, lashing out with a double kick that caught one wolf in the side. Another wolf tried to snap at the horse's front leg, only to recoil when the Mustang slammed its hoof down in a breathtaking display of force. Cries and snarls tangled in a cacophony of violence. The alpha circled around, searching for a vulnerability. Blood flecked the snow from both animal and horse, painting the ground in a grim tableau. The child curled into a ball, though it did little to stave off the cold or the pervasive sense of dread. It felt like the night would never end, as if trapped in an eternal loop of desperate struggle and piercing cold. The Mustang's endurance seemed almost otherworldly, fueled by some primal will that defied exhaustion. If not for that fierce determination, the child would have been overtaken long ago. Nevertheless, the harsh reality was that the horse could not keep this up indefinitely. Each wound drained more life from it, and each close call frayed the child's already tenuous grasp on consciousness. In a sudden surge of boldness, the alpha and two other wolves rushed the Mustang from 3 angles. Forced to pivot rapidly, the horse managed to strike one attacker, but another managed to scratch its flank, drawing yet more blood. The Mustang recoiled, twisting around. The child's heart thundered wildly, willing the horse to endure. Another low growl rumbled from the alpha's throat, signaling its pack to regroup for another strike. All the while, the lead wolf's gaze kept flicking toward the child, the easy prey, as though waiting for just the right moment to bypass the horse altogether. A wave of panic washed over the child, intensifying the sense of entrapment. If only there were a branch to wield, or a rock to throw, anything to ward off the predators even briefly. But there was only snow and the cold emptiness of the forest. The child found a trembling hand drifting toward the ground, as if searching blindly for some sort of weapon. Fingers brushed over ice-crusted snow, failing to grasp anything substantial. Then the child's head drooped, the unstoppable drowsiness of hypothermia encroaching. 1,000 needles pricked at the child's consciousness. As the wind moaned through skeletal branches, the Mustang made a sudden dash toward the child, positioning itself closer than ever, effectively blocking the wolves' direct path. The child felt the radiating warmth from the horse's body, a comforting reminder that life still existed in this frozen wasteland. With a shaky exhalation, the child steadied a hand against the horse's leg, feeling the tremor of straining muscles beneath the coat. At that moment, a jolt of energy, perhaps merely a spark of survival instinct, spurred the child to remain awake, at least a while longer. If the horse was willing to fight, the child would not yield to despair. The wolves fanned out again, reassuming their predatory formation. Their breaths came in ragged puffs of steam, eyes glittering with an almost manic hunger. The stench of sweat, blood, and raw tension hung heavy in the air, creating an aura of impending doom. The Mustang shifted its weight from one leg to another, ignoring the fresh dribble of blood that stained the snow. With a fierce neigh, it signaled its defiance once more, as if daring the wolves to try their luck. In that brief lull, the child wondered if dawn was near. The night stretched on interminably, but perhaps the morning sun was creeping ever closer beyond the horizon. The first gray light of day might offer salvation or at least clarity. Wolves were known to be braver in darkness, but would they relent at daylight? And would the child still be alive to see it? No one could predict. The only certainty was the tension, unbroken and merciless, as the wolves prepared for another coordinated attack. The Mustang and the child braced themselves. An unspoken bond existed now, a unity forged in struggle, as two vulnerable lives confronted a threat that neither had invited. And so they waited, hearts pounding, as the wilderness watched with frigid indifference, testifying to the timeless, brutal law of survival that governed each breath in this desolate realm. The hours of night dragged on with agonizing slowness, weaving a tapestry of exhaustion and raw desperation around the unlikely pair. The child, trembling on the verge of delirium, could sense the bitter cold burrowing deeper into flesh and bone. Each breath was a stinging struggle against the frigid air, and every exhalation felt like a small surrender to the elements. Across from that pitiful figure, the Mustang stood resolute, though signs of strain had become impossible to ignore. Its once proud stance was lower, its head drooping between bursts of frenetic activity when the wolves ventured too close. Blood still trickled from cuts along its flank, staining the deep chestnut coat. Yet despite the weariness, the Mustang's eyes retained a fierce spark, a testament to the sheer force of will driving it to protect the child. A narrow path of trampled snow now lay around them, testimony to the relentless circling of the wolves. The pack had grown more cautious, as each failed rush risked injury, but hunger goaded them to push forward. They spread out in a wide arc, blocking every route of escape. Their low growls and the crunch of paws on the snow were the only constant notes in an otherwise silent night, aside from the shuddering inhales of the horse and the ragged panting of the child. Despite the tension, an odd lull had settled in, as though each participant in this grim dance was waiting for the other to make the first misstep. With a suddenness that sent the child's heart lurching, the Alpha prowled forward again. The scar across its muzzle looked more pronounced under the moonlight, a permanent reminder of some past battle. The wolf's lips curled, exposing yellow fangs that glistened with a slick sheen. Behind it, two others took up positions, ready to exploit any distraction. The Mustang raised its head, flattened its ears, and stamped a forehoof threateningly. Even in that posture of challenge, one could see the horse's muscles quivering from the unending strain. For a moment, nobody moved. Then the Alpha snarled, and the wolves surged. The Mustang lunged to meet them, kicking wildly, hooves connecting with savage impacts. One wolf was thrown onto its side, whimpering as it scrabbled to regain footing. Another clamped its jaws onto the Mustang's tail, only to be shaken loose when the horse thrashed in panic. Snow flew in all directions, illuminated by sporadic moonbeams breaking through the canopy. To the child, each second felt like a moment suspended between life and death, an eternal uncertainty about who would emerge unbroken. In the fray, one wolf slipped around the horse and made a beeline for the child. Panic roiled in the child's gut, fueling an abrupt burst of energy. When the child's family, eager to bring their beloved child home, had a conversation with the barn's owners and the local veterinarians. They debated what might be best for the Mustang. Some argued for releasing it back into the wild once fully healed. Others proposed placing it with a sanctuary, where it would never face the threat of predators or starvation again. The child, quietly listening, felt a swirl of conflicting emotions. On one hand, the horse's true nature was freedom. On the other, letting it vanish into the wilderness seemed a betrayal, especially after it risked everything to protect a human life. In the end, they agreed to postpone any decision until the Mustang had completely recovered. This indefinite reprieve allowed the child to cherish each remaining day with the horse. They developed a curious routine of slow walks at sunrise, feeding sessions interspersed with grooming, and quiet afternoons in the stable's soft light. The rescue team and volunteers became a tight-knit group, sharing stories and laughter between chores, each contributing time and resources to sustain the horse's recovery. The child's strength continued to grow, though occasional aches remained, a legacy of frostbite and the bone-deep chill that had once threatened to claim a life. Yet each time the child felt that ache, a glance at the horse served as a reminder of why it was worth enduring. Here was a living being that bore the brunt of an entire wolf pack's fury to shield a defenseless stranger. The child was determined to pay that debt of gratitude in kindness, companionship, and unwavering loyalty. Late one afternoon, as rain pattered against the barn's tin roof, the child prepared to bring the Mustang in from the paddock. The horse had been restless all day, stomping hooves as if eager for something. Opening the gate, the child stepped aside to let the Mustang enter. Instead, the horse halted, turning its head toward the distant line of trees where snowy peaks rose in the background. A wind gust carried the scent of evergreens. The Mustang's ears twitched. For a moment, it seemed lost in memory, a flicker of the wild calling it home. The child watched in silence, heart tight with anticipation. Would the Mustang break free, gallop into the horizon, returning to the solitude of mountain forests and rolling valleys? Or would it remain, bound by the fragile threads of friendship woven during those nights of peril? The standoff lasted several seconds, an eternity in the child's anxious mind. Then the horse blew out a soft breath, turned away from the trees, and ambled into the barn, passing by the child with a gentle brush of shoulder against shoulder. Relief and an inexplicable wave of love washed over the child, who followed the horse inside, sliding the barn door shut behind them. For now, at least, the Mustang had chosen to stay. Whether that decision would hold tomorrow, a week from now, or next month, no one could say. But in that fleeting moment, each footstep on the stable floor echoed with a quiet sense of belonging. The child exhaled, smoothing a hand along the horse's neck. "You're safe," the child whispered, echoing the same words once spoken by a gentle caretaker. Safe, for however long fate allowed, in a place where the bond formed in the crucible of life and death had transcended every boundary of fear. As twilight dimmed, painting the sky with subdued shades of purple and gray, the child remained in the barn, listening to the rhythmic munch of the Mustang eating hay. Outside, the wind had quieted to a mere whisper, no longer bearing the ominous howls of hungry wolves. It felt like a respite after the storm, a lull in which both horse and child could finally breathe without the weight of survival pressing in from every side. Though uncertainties about the future loomed, they no longer choked the air with dread. Hope had taken root, as fragile and resilient as a seedling pushing through thawing soil. Within those sturdy wooden walls, the child found solace in the Mustang's presence, a reminder that once, not so long ago, two souls had met in a frozen landscape, each needing the other in ways neither could have imagined. There, in the gentle hush of straw and lamplit shadows, the final chords of winter's brutality began to recede, replaced by the beginnings of a healing spring for both battered bodies and weary hearts. Spring arrived in subtle increments, first in the softer light that gilded the horizon at dawn, then in the gradual melting of snowbanks under the barn's eaves. Green shoots began to poke through the thawed patches of earth, and the air carried the fresh scent of renewal. For the child and the Mustang, these changes paralleled their own journey. Slowly, the child's movements grew more fluid, the limp less pronounced. Fingertips that had once been numb and pallid regained some color, though faint scars and sensitivity remained as permanent reminders of the winter ordeal. The Mustang's coat also started to shine with a healthier gloss, and though scars still marred the skin, they no longer bled or oozed. Each day brought a little more strength, a little more freedom from pain. When the Mustang ventured outside, it occasionally snorted at the wind, as if greeting the warmer breeze with curiosity rather than dread. On several afternoons, the child sat on a weathered fence post, watching the horse explore the paddock with something approaching the spirited gait it must have possessed before the wolves' attack. The horse would sometimes glance over, ears perked, as if to invite the child to join in its quiet reverie of being alive. And the child would laugh, a sound that had once seemed impossible in those desperate nights of cold and fear. Word of the horse's recovery spread through the local community, drawing a handful of onlookers who came in small groups to see the legendary Mustang. They marveled at its resilience, at the improbable alliance that had formed between a wild creature and a vulnerable child in the heart of a winter wilderness. Some came bearing gifts, carrots, sugar cubes, or soft brushes, but the Mustang mostly ignored these strangers, allowing only the child and a select few who had been present from the beginning to approach. The bond between horse and child was evident in every gentle gesture. Eventually, the time came for the child to consider returning to normal life. Family and friends encouraged the child to come home, to rejoin school and the everyday routines left behind. Mixed emotions churned in the child's mind. Part of the child yearned for the familiar comforts of home, for the warm bed and the laughter of loved ones, but another part worried about leaving the Mustang. Who would ensure that the horse continued to receive the care, patience, and kindness necessary for a complete return to health? Would the Mustang feel abandoned if the child left? Those concerns weighed heavily, until the barn's owners and local volunteers offered a solution. They promised to maintain the stable as long as the Mustang needed it, to nurture the horse with the same compassion the child had shown. The veterinarian pledged regular checkups, and a few experienced ranch hands agreed to handle feeding, grooming, and daily walks. Though it pained the child to imagine days passing without seeing that familiar dark coat and proud stance, it was a relief to know that the Mustang would not be alone. The child, hugging the horse's neck, whispered heartfelt thanks and a hope-filled goodbye, not forever, but until the next visit. The morning of departure arrived under a soft pink sky. A truck waited at the edge of the property, ready to take the child home. Heart pounding, the child walked to the paddock for one final moment alone with the Mustang. The horse lifted its head, eyes reflecting the pastel hues of sunrise. There was no need for words. Both had shared an experience that defied simple explanation, a bond etched in the memory of terror and triumph. Still, tears gathered in the child's eyes. With trembling hands, the child unlatched the paddock gate and stepped inside. The Mustang, calm and steady, allowed the child to press a forehead against its warm muzzle. A gentle exhale of breath washed over the child's face. It felt like a benediction. "Thank you," the child murmured, voice quavering with emotion. "I won't forget what you did." For a brief instant, the horse nuzzled the child's jacket, perhaps sensing the imminent goodbye. Then it shook its mane and pawed the ground, a regal gesture that spoke of its indomitable nature. With one last stroke of its neck, the child turned and walked away, tears slipping free but head held high. A few minutes later, the truck rumbled down the dirt road, carrying the child toward a familiar world that had been irrevocably changed by a single night's trial in the snow. Weeks passed. The child found comfort in home-cooked meals, the lively chatter of friends, and the soft glow of a bedroom lamp. Yet every so often, the child's thoughts drifted back to the barn, a quiet longing to hear the Mustang's breath, to run fingers through that thick mane, to exchange unspoken reassurances of safety. Letters and phone calls brought updates. The horse continued to improve, walking more confidently, even cantering for short bursts in the paddock. The vet believed it might fully recover with a few more months of diligent care. The winter scars would remain, but they'd be badges of survival rather than crippling wounds. One balmy afternoon, near the cusp of summer, the child returned for a visit. Bursting with excitement, the child hopped out of the family's car, ignoring the slight twinge in sore joints, and sprinted across the barnyard. The stable doors were open, letting in a sweet breeze. From inside, a familiar nicker greeted the child's ears. Heart leaping, the child followed the sound to the paddock. There, in the dappled sunlight filtering through budding trees, stood the Mustang, head high, tail swishing contentedly. The moment their gazes locked, the child felt a surge of joy that eclipsed any lingering sorrow. The Mustang trotted over, meeting the child at the fence. With laughter shining in tear-filled eyes, the child reached through the slats to pet the horse's muzzle. Both stood there, reunited under a sky that was no longer laden with storm clouds but bright with promise. The Mustang's scars had faded into faint lines beneath a glossy summer coat. The child's own scars, thin marks on fingers and toes, throbbed slightly at the memory of that fateful night, but that pain was overshadowed by gratitude. Time seemed to slow as the child climbed onto the fence, leaning close. Maybe one day the Mustang would be free to roam again, galloping through open fields or mountainous terrain. Or perhaps it would remain here, among people who cherished its story and its fierce, loyal heart. Either way, the child resolved to visit often, to remain a friend to the creature that had once stood against a pack of wolves to save a life. Leaning against the fence, the child glanced around and smiled at the transformations wrought by spring and early summer. Flowers dotted the yard, a testament to rebirth. The memory of howls and snapping jaws felt like a distant nightmare. It was then that the child turned toward an old friend, the camera, a small device that had once documented family vacations and happy times. Lifting it, the child snapped a photo of the Mustang, capturing the elegant neck and soulful eyes bathed in sunlight. That single image, the child thought, contained an entire journey: fear, hope, suffering, bravery, and an unbreakable bond formed in the crucible of survival. With the picture taken, the child placed the camera aside and opened the paddock gate. The horse snorted softly, stepping closer in gentle curiosity. Carefully, the child slid a hand up the Mustang's neck, pausing at the withers, where once, in the chaos of a wolf attack, the child had clung for dear life. Now there was only quiet appreciation in the hush of a warm day. The Mustang lowered its head, allowing the child's forehead to rest lightly against it. A rush of emotion welled up, and the child whispered, "We made it!" For a moment neither moved. The connection between them felt as solid as the fence beneath the child's feet and as endless as the sky overhead. That evening, after sharing news of the Mustang's vibrant health with friends and neighbors, the child found a peaceful corner of the barn to reflect. Outside, the sun dipped behind the distant hills, painting them in oranges and purples. The Mustang had been led back into the stable for the night, and the child lingered by the stall, a gentle hand resting on the warm flank of the horse. No words were needed. The horse breathed calmly, eyes half closed in contentment, and the child's heart brimmed with gratitude and reverence for this second chance at life. And so the story of the lone Mustang and the lost child reached a place of solace and hope. The wolves were long gone, reduced to distant echoes in the dark corners of memory. The snows had melted, revealing the earth's persistent drive to renew itself. The child had returned home with scars that spoke not of defeat, but of resilience. And the Mustang, scarred but unbroken, carried on, forging a bond that transcended the ordinary boundaries between horse and human. In the end, they had defied the odds together, surviving a night that no one who heard the tale would soon forget. Before you go, let us know in the comments where you were reading this story from, and if it moved you, be sure to subscribe for more tales of courage, survival, and the unbreakable bond between living beings. We upload every day at the same time, and we'd love to share more adventures that remind us all of the power of hope and the extraordinary possibilities that arise when empathy triumphs over fear.